Jake Williams had always believed in simplicity, but everything changed the moment he stumbled upon Mona, a German shepherd, abandoned and struggling to breathe, trapped under a glass jar, her ribs visible beneath her fur. She wasn't just a dog, she was a survivor. Despite his own childhood fear of dogs, Jake couldn't walk away from her desperate gaze. As the clock ticked, Jake found himself at a crossroads. Will he face his past fears to save her, or let her suffer in silence? Mona's fate hung by a thread. Will Jake be able to save her in time? Watch now to see if courage can overcome fear. Jake Williams was a man who had always valued simplicity. At 28, he had learned the hard way to appreciate quiet moments. His life, for the most part, was predictable. A steady job as a construction worker, a modest home, and the quiet anticipation of becoming a father in just a few short months. Today, however, would be different. He arrived early at the demolition site, a dusty, desolate lot on East 7th Street. The sun had just risen, casting long shadows over the abandoned buildings, their broken windows and crumbling brick walls telling stories of neglect and time. Jake was alone that morning, a rare moment of peace before his crew showed up. The familiar sound of his sledgehammer hitting the walls reverberated in the stillness, a rhythm that allowed his thoughts to settle. As Jake swung the hammer, he found himself thinking about his future, a future with his wife Rebecca and their soon-to-arrive child. He could already picture the nursery, the small shoes by the door, and the quiet nights spent rocking his baby to sleep. But it was the quiet that made him nervous. He had been terrified of becoming a father, unsure if he was ready to face the responsibility. With a sigh, he wiped the sweat from his brow and took a break. That was when he heard it, a sound that did not belong in the quiet morning. Glass scraping against concrete. It was faint at first, then louder, more desperate. Jake froze, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. His instincts told him to walk away. His mind raced with thoughts of raccoons or maybe an old pipe shifting under the weight of the building. But something in the sound, something raw and urgent, made him take a step forward. He made his way toward the sound, cautiously stepping over piles of debris, his boots crunching the gravel beneath him. The morning heat was already oppressive and sweat dripped down his neck. Then he saw her. A large brown and black dog lying motionless on the concrete, her ribs visible through matted fur. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he took in the sight. Her head was completely stuck inside a large glass jar, a 5-gallon water jug fogged with condensation. The poor creature had clearly been struggling for hours under the brutal Texas sun. But it was the bulging belly that caught Jake's breath. She was pregnant. Jake's body tensed. He recognized the breed. German Shepherd. His father had always said they were noble dogs, but Jake's experience with dogs was limited, and not by choice. When he was 8, a German Shepherd had attacked him, leaving a permanent scar on his shoulder that reminded him of his fear every time he saw a dog of that size. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, intending to call animal control, but before he could dial, he saw her eyes, bloodshot, exhausted, yet alert. She looked at him through the glass, her gaze pleading, her body barely moving as if every breath was a struggle. Something shifted in Jake. His fear, the instinct to run, fought against something else, a sense of responsibility. He had to help her. He stepped closer, the air thick with tension. The dog's labored breathing was the only sound in the silence. Jake took a deep breath, pushed aside his panic, and knelt down to get a better look. The glass was thick, industrial grade, and the dog's swollen neck was trapped inside. Jake felt a knot tighten in his chest. He could call for help, but the dog didn't have time. Her time was running out. Jake's heart raced as he watched the dog's labored breathing. Each shallow gasp sounded more desperate than the last. The sight of Mona, her body trembling beneath the glass jar, tugged at something deep inside him, something he had long buried. His fear of dogs, rooted in that childhood attack, had always been stronger than any sense of compassion, but now, in the face of this suffering animal, his fear seemed insignificant. He swallowed hard, wiping the sweat from his brow. The heat of the Texas sun pressed down on him, but it wasn't just the weather that made him sweat. It was the overwhelming sense of helplessness. He needed to act, but the instinct to walk away, to leave the situation to someone else, gnawed at him. He stepped closer, the gap between him and Mona shrinking with each hesitant movement. She whimpered softly, her body still, but her eyes, they were filled with something Jake hadn't expected. It wasn't fear, it wasn't aggression, it was something he recognized: desperation. The kind of desperation that mirrors his own. She was asking for help, and there was no one else here to answer her call. Jake's hands shook, but he forced himself to take the next step. He knelt beside her, keeping his distance, just in case, but still close enough to see the full extent of her suffering. The glass jar pressed painfully against her swollen neck. Jake could see the bulging veins in her face, the way her eyes darted to him, and he knew if he didn't act, she wouldn't last much longer. Her breathing was ragged, the once steady rhythm now punctuated by painful gasps. He reached out his hand, trembling, and placed it gently on the jar. His fingers brushed against the smooth, cool surface, feeling the vibration of Mona's desperate attempts to breathe. "Okay, girl," he whispered softly, trying to steady his own breathing. "I'll help you. Just hang on." Jake carefully tried to pull the jar free, but it wouldn't budge. His hand slipped against the glass as he pressed harder. The jar was too tight around her neck, and Mona's body stiffened, her breath coming faster, her panic mounting with each failed attempt to free herself. Jake's mind raced. He couldn't afford to waste time. He looked around, but there was no one else. No one to help him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. The only thing that mattered now was Mona, and the clock was ticking. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. He stood up, frustration welling inside him. There was no way he could pull the jar off with his bare hands. He needed help. He needed tools. He bolted toward his truck, his heart pounding in his chest. His feet stumbled on the uneven ground, but he didn't stop. Come on," he muttered under his breath, desperately trying to think of something, anything that would work. He grabbed a bottle of motor oil from the truck bed, a long shot, but maybe it could help loosen the jar. He rushed back, heart in his throat, only to find Mona struggling even more. Her breathing was becoming more erratic, the distress clearly written on her face. The motor oil didn't help. The jar still wouldn't budge. Jake sank to his knees beside her again, this time in complete despair. His hands were slick with sweat and oil, but they were still trembling. The dog was fading, and he couldn't do anything. Not fast enough. Not enough to save her. His mind raced, and then in the haze of panic, he realized there was only one option left. He couldn't do this on his own. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating, but Jake knew he had to try something else, something he hadn't done in a long time. He grabbed his phone. He didn't hesitate. He opened Facebook, his fingers fumbling over the screen. Emergency. East 7th and Cal Street. Dog dying. Head stuck in jar. Pregnant. Authorities say 4 to 6 hours. She doesn't have 46 minutes. Please help. He hit post, his heart pounding. Then he sat back, staring at the screen, watching the post go live. Time felt like it was standing still. "Please," Jake whispered. "Please let someone see this." Jake sat in the dust, his phone in his hand, staring at the post he'd just written. His heart beat loudly in his chest, each thud a reminder of the urgency that clung to the air. The sun was rising higher, and with it the heat. Mona's breathing was still labored, desperate, and the glass jar encasing her head seemed to mock him, its unyielding surface reflecting the hopelessness in her eyes. His mind spun as he stared at the screen. He couldn't save her by himself. His hands had failed her. His fear had almost paralyzed him. But now he had done the one thing he could do: reach out for help. The seconds stretched, and Jake was almost convinced that no one would see it in time. But then the phone buzzed. It was a message. "Jake, I'm on my way. Hold tight. I'm coming from Round Rock. I saw your post. We'll get her out of that jar." Jake blinked, reading the message again, disbelief creeping over him. "Sarah Mitchell, she's coming. She's coming to help." He could feel his chest tighten with a mixture of relief and anxiety. The helplessness that had gripped him slowly loosened, replaced by a flicker of hope. He quickly typed a response. "Thank you. Please hurry. She's fading fast." As Jake sent the message, he stood up and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked over at Mona, who seemed to have quieted slightly, her breathing still shallow but less erratic. She had stopped struggling against the jar, too weak now to resist. Jake walked closer to her, crouching down to her level. Her eyes flickered toward him again, just as they had when he first found her. She was still alert, still aware, and it made his heart ache even more. Jake knew there wasn't much time. But with Sarah on the way, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for Mona to survive this. Jake paced around the construction site, occasionally glancing at his phone, waiting for Sarah to confirm she was close. The sun was getting hotter, and he could feel his frustration mounting with every minute that passed. He couldn't just stand there, but there was nothing else he could do. He didn't have the tools or knowledge to help Mona on his own. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, his phone buzzed again. "I'm at the site, Jake. Heading toward the back now. Hang in there. We'll fix this." A wave of relief washed over him. He dashed toward the back of the site, where Mona still lay trapped in her struggle, her body limp beneath the weight of the glass jar. As he approached, he saw Sarah's car pulling into the lot. It wasn't much, but to Jake it was a lifeline. The vehicle came to a stop, and Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian he'd seen in the online community posts, stepped out. She was smaller than Jake had imagined, but her posture was firm, determined, and her eyes radiated calm professionalism. "Where is she?" Sarah asked as she rushed toward him. Jake pointed to the spot where Mona lay. His voice cracked as he spoke. "She's there. She's pregnant. Stuck in that jar. I've tried everything. I'm afraid it's too late." Sarah didn't waste time with words. She was already on her knees beside the dog, her hands gently brushing over Mona's body. She looked up at Jake, her face serious. "Don't worry," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "I'll take care of this. We're going to get her out of there." Jake stepped back, allowing Sarah to take charge, her hands moving quickly and efficiently. As she assessed Mona's condition, she muttered under her breath, her trained eye taking in the severity of the situation. Mona was still alive, but barely. Her heart rate was slow, her body weak from the prolonged stress. With no time to lose, Sarah pulled out a syringe from her kit, and Jake watched as she administered something to Mona's swollen neck. Her movements were precise, confident. The vet spoke softly, her voice a steady reassurance. "I'm giving her an anti-inflammatory to help reduce the swelling. It should buy us some time. Once that takes effect, I'll try to remove the jar." Jake stood there watching, feeling helpless but not completely without hope. Mona had fought so hard to survive, and now with Sarah's expertise, maybe she could be saved. Maybe for the first time, Jake could be the one who helped instead of running away. The minutes stretched on, but it wasn't long before Sarah gave a quick nod. "She's starting to relax. It's working. I'm going to try and remove the jar now." Jake held his breath. He knew the danger. One wrong move, one mistake, and Mona could be lost. But Sarah was confident, and she moved with a purpose, carefully maneuvering the glass jar. Jake stayed close, waiting for the moment that would determine whether Mona lived or died. Jake stood still, his heart pounding as Sarah worked with precision, her hands steady despite the urgency of the situation. Mona's body lay lifeless, her labored breathing the only sign that she was still hanging on. The weight of the moment was crushing, and Jake's mind kept returning to the same place, his past. He could still see it as if it were yesterday, the image forever burned in his memory. It had been a typical summer afternoon when he was 8 years old, riding his bike down the sidewalk, unaware of what was about to happen. He remembered the sudden blur of motion, the sound of growling, and then the sharp, searing pain in his shoulder as the German Shepherd lunged at him. The dog had been wild, out of control. Jake had no time to react before its teeth sank into his flesh. The pain was instant, the terror even more so. The owner had pulled the dog off him quickly, but it was too late. The scar across his shoulder had healed, but the emotional wound had never fully closed. Since that day, Jake had avoided dogs. Any large dog, especially German Shepherds, sent a wave of panic through him. The fear had become ingrained, something he couldn't shake off no matter how hard he tried. And now here he was, crouched beside Mona, a German Shepherd in distress, a dog who could just as easily remind him of his worst fear. But it wasn't the same dog. This one was struggling, suffocating, and desperately needed help. Jake's fear flared again as he watched Sarah pull the glass jar a little more. His heart skipped a beat. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and Mona could be lost. But something was different this time. Jake wasn't running away. He wasn't frozen in place. The sight of Mona's pain stirred something in him, something beyond fear. Compassion, determination, even guilt. He had to help her. He had to face what terrified him most. He couldn't allow this dog to suffer because of his past. Mona's eyes flickered toward him as Sarah continued to work. Jake felt a tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was resolve. He couldn't let her die, not after everything she had endured. He stayed as close as possible, his hands clenched into fists, trying to calm his nerves. Mona, despite her pain, seemed to be holding on. She was fighting, the same way he had fought every day to get past his fears. Sarah worked carefully, gently rotating the jar, ensuring every movement was deliberate. Jake's eyes stayed on Mona, watching her reaction, waiting for the moment that would either save her or take her life. The tension in the air was palpable. His heart raced with every movement of Sarah's hands. He could hear the faint squeak of the jar, the glass shifting just slightly, and Mona's soft whimper in response. "Come on," Jake whispered under his breath. "You can do this." He had no idea how much longer they could hold on. He didn't know if Sarah's plan would work, but he did know one thing. He wasn't going to let Mona die because of his fear. And then, just as Jake thought he couldn't hold his breath any longer, Sarah gave him a quick nod. "She's calming down. I think we can get it off now." Relief washed over Jake, but it was fleeting. The job wasn't done yet. There was still a long way to go. His pulse quickened as Sarah took the next step. One wrong move and it would all fall apart. But in that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't just going to stay close, he was going to help. With a final careful twist of her hands, Sarah gently pried the last bit of the glass free. Jake could feel the air in his lungs as if it had been held there for hours. The jar came away with a slight scrape and Mona let out a soft exhale, her body slackening just a little as if relieved. She no longer seemed to be fighting to escape it. Instead, she was trying to breathe, trying to stay conscious. Jake stepped back slightly, watching as Sarah carefully checked Mona's neck and shoulders for injuries. Her hands were steady, her face focused as she felt for any signs of damage that might have been caused by the jar's constriction. He could see the sweat beading on her forehead, but she didn't flinch. She was a professional, and she was making sure Mona would be all right. The dog's eyes, though tired, flickered in Jake's direction. They were full of desperation, but there was something else there now. Trust. Jake didn't know how it happened, but in that moment, as Mona looked at him, he knew she wasn't just a rescue mission. She was a partner, a survivor just like him. He had feared this very moment his whole life. The presence of a large, powerful dog, but now there was no room for fear. There was only the deep, aching need to help. "She's alive," Sarah said softly, but there was a weight to her voice. "She's gonna make it." Jake nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. The dog was still weak, but her heart rate had steadied and her breathing wasn't as labored as before. He could tell Mona wasn't fully recovered yet, but she had been saved. That was the first battle. There was still a long road ahead. What happened to her? Jake asked, his voice rough from the tension. He knew she was in pain, but he also knew there was more to Mona's story than just being trapped in that jar. The fear in her eyes, the scars on her body. There was a history there. Sarah didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath and her hands moving over Mona's body gently as she spoke. "She's a retired police K-9 from the Austin Police Department," Sarah explained. "Her name is Mona. She was one of the best. She served for years, narcotics detection, explosives, search and rescue. She saved a lot of lives." Jake felt his chest tighten as Sarah continued. The image of a dog, trained, disciplined, relied upon for dangerous work, was far from the fragile animal he saw before him now. Mona had served her purpose in the line of duty. But then, what had happened? Why was she lying here abandoned, pregnant, and weak? She was paired with Officer Michael Garrett. Sarah continued, he was a good man, a decorated officer. He had a son, Tommy. Mona was part of their family, but after Tommy died, well, things changed for both of them. Jake frowned, unsure what Sarah meant. What do you mean? What happened? Michael was devastated, Sarah explained. Tommy died in a tragic incident. He was caught in a raid gone wrong. Michael took it hard, really hard. And after that, Mona, she started getting the brunt of his anger. He couldn't handle it. He mistreated her. He began to see her as a reminder of what he lost. A tool, not a companion. Jake was stunned. The Mona he had just helped felt nothing like a tool. She had been broken, yes, but not by the work she had been made to do. She had been broken by the people she trusted, the ones she fought for. The thought of a dog so loyal being abused by the very people she had protected made his stomach turn. After that, Sarah said, her voice softening, Mona was abandoned. She was left on the streets, pregnant and in terrible condition. She made her way here to this construction site. She's been living like this for months. Jake's eyes locked on Mona again. He could see it now. The way she had tried to survive on her own, the way she had fought to protect her unborn pups even when no one had fought for her. Mona wasn't just a dog, she was a survivor. And somehow through all of it, she had found her way to him. As Jake knelt beside her again, he gently stroked her fur, trying to comfort her in a way that words couldn't. He didn't understand the full scope of what she had been through, but he felt a bond forming between them. She had been abandoned, and now she was here with him. For the first time, Jake didn't see a scary German shepherd. He saw a dog that had been through hell and back, and still she was fighting. Jake sat on the concrete beside Mona, her body resting gently against him. He could feel her warmth, her heartbeat steady beneath his touch. For the first time since finding her, he allowed himself to truly look at her. Not just as a stray, not just as a German shepherd, but as a living, breathing soul that had suffered far more than any animal should. His fingers traced over the scars on her back, the jagged lines and old wounds that seemed to tell a silent story of pain and neglect. Every scar spoke of betrayal, each one etched into her fur like a reminder of the trust she had given to those who never deserved it. Mona hadn't just been abandoned, she had been broken, used, and discarded, forgotten by the very people she had sworn to protect. Jake's chest tightened with a mixture of anger and sorrow. How could anyone treat a dog like that? He had seen the loyalty in her eyes when she first looked at him. It was the same loyalty he had seen in his own reflection as a boy, a kind of loyalty that made you believe in something bigger than yourself. Mona had fought for people who had not fought for her, and in return, she had been betrayed. His thoughts spiraled back to his own childhood, to the German shepherd that had attacked him. The scar on his shoulder had never fully healed, not just physically but emotionally. For years that fear had controlled him, kept him at a distance from any dog, especially one of this size. The dog from his past had taken away his sense of safety, left him with a permanent reminder of pain and fear. But Mona wasn't like that dog. She was different. She was not an enemy. She was a victim of a world that didn't understand her. And now, as Jake sat beside her, he realized that his own fear, his own past, had no place in this moment. Mona needed him. As he gently stroked her fur, a sense of connection began to build between them. It wasn't just that he was saving her, it was that in some way she was saving him too. She was showing him that not all dogs were to be feared, that there was strength in vulnerability, and that love could heal wounds, even those from the past. Mona's breathing had become steady, and the tension in her body seemed to dissipate with each passing minute. Jake felt the weight of the moment settle in. He was no longer afraid. He could see Mona for who she truly was, a survivor, a creature of loyalty and strength. She was no longer the symbol of his fear. She was something more, a reminder of the power of second chances. As he leaned forward, Jake whispered softly to Mona, "We're in this together now. I'm not going anywhere." The bond between them, once tenuous and fraught with his own fears, had now solidified into something unspoken, but deeply felt. He had given her a chance, and she had given him the same. As Sarah stepped back, her hands wiping the sweat from her brow, she gave Jake a knowing look. She's stronger than she looks, Sarah said softly, almost to herself. But she's been through a lot. The real work starts now. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He wasn't just helping Mona recover physically, he was helping her heal emotionally. And in doing so, he was healing too. Jake sat back on his heels, taking a deep breath as he watched Mona's slow, steady rise and fall of her chest. Her recovery, though delicate, had begun. But as Sarah turned to gather her supplies, Jake's mind wandered back to Mona's past, the pieces of her story that had led her here to him in this desolate construction yard, struggling to breathe. Jake had learned a little about Mona's history through Sarah, but there were still gaps, shadows of a life she had once known before she was discarded. Now as he sat there, his fingers absently stroking Mona's fur, he couldn't help but wonder about the man who had once been her partner, her owner. Michael Garrett. Michael Garrett had been a police officer, a canine handler with the Austin Police Department, and he had trained Mona. Jake could picture him, Mishanam, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by years of tough work and tougher losses. Michael had been a hero in the eyes of many a dedicated officer who had put his heart into his job. But then tragedy struck. His son Tommy had died in a violent raid, and that loss changed everything. Jake had seen the aftermath of grief in his own life, the way it hollowed people out, turning them into shells of their former selves. But he hadn't seen it like this. The pain of losing Tommy had consumed Michael, a grief so raw and deep that it twisted into something else, anger, rage. And in that rage, Mona had become a victim. Once Michael and Mona had been an unstoppable team. They had worked together, tracked down criminals, and found dangerous explosives. Mona had been Michael's partner, his trusted companion. But when Tommy died, Michael couldn't see Mona as anything more than a painful reminder of everything he had lost. His grief turned into frustration, and Mona, the loyal dog who had always been there for him, became the target of his misplaced anger. Jake could only imagine how things must have changed for Mona after that. She had once been trained to save lives, to protect, to obey, but now, with Michael's heart shattered, she became something else, a tool for his misplaced wrath. Jake shook his head. He couldn't fathom it. How could a man who had worked alongside Mona for years, a man who had trusted her with his life, turn on her so violently? But that was the cruel truth. As Michael's grief deepened, his actions toward Mona became more erratic. He would lash out at her when she didn't perform perfectly, when she showed signs of hesitation, signs that under the circumstances, any dog might show. She wasn't a machine. She was a living, breathing being who had loved and served him. And so in the wake of his son's death, Mona was cast aside, abandoned on the streets, pregnant and emaciated. She had been left to fend for herself, to fight for survival on her own. She had tried to make it, but the world she had been left in was cold and indifferent. As Jake looked at Mona now, he realized just how much of her suffering had been a result of Michael's inability to heal, to face the pain that had consumed him. She hadn't just lost her place as a K-9 officer, she had lost the one person who should have cared for her. Mona wasn't just a dog. She was a soul who had endured more than any creature should. And yet here she was, fighting for life once again, trying to bring her puppies into the world despite all that had happened to her. Jake couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow for Michael Garrett as he pieced together the story of what had happened to Mona. Michael had been a good man, a devoted officer who had once trained Mona to be the best K-9 in the department. But grief had a way of warping everything it touched, and Michael's heart had shattered when his son Tommy was killed in a tragic raid. Instead of finding a way to heal, he had let his pain destroy him, and Mona had become the victim of that destruction. When Mona was reassigned to Michael after Tommy's death, she had hoped for a chance to rebuild the partnership they had once shared. But Michael wasn't the same man anymore. His anger, his grief, it consumed him. The dog who had once been his trusted partner became a mere tool for him to use, no longer the companion she had been. Mona would hesitate, or she would miss a signal, and Michael would lash out, punishing her instead of guiding her, instead of understanding the toll that the trauma had taken on both of them. As Michael continued to spiral into despair, Mona's own suffering intensified. She had been trained to endure tough situations, to push through pain and hardship, but no amount of training had prepared her for the emotional and physical neglect she began to face. Her loyalty to Michael never wavered, even though he treated her like a broken machine. She kept fighting not for herself, but for the lives growing inside her. Mona's body was failing, but her spirit, the part of her that had been forged through years of service, remained unbroken. The day Mona was abandoned, pregnant, and weak was a turning point. Michael, too, consumed by his own grief to care for her, let her slip through the cracks. She had been discarded, left to fend for herself in a harsh world that offered no compassion. But Mona didn't give up. She fought for the lives inside her, even as her body deteriorated. Despite everything she had been through, she never stopped being loyal, never stopped trying to survive. Jake thought about that as he sat beside her, feeling the steady thrum of her heart against his hand. She had suffered more than any dog should, yet she had kept fighting. She had kept going for her puppies, and now for him. The bond that had been formed between them was more than just a rescue mission. It was a shared understanding of pain, of survival, and of the relentless will to keep moving forward even when everything seemed lost. Jake thought about his own life. The fear, the anger he had carried with him for years, the memories of the German Shepherd that had attacked him when he was a child. For so long he had run from his fears. But now, sitting beside Mona, he understood something profound. Facing his fears didn't mean running away from them. It meant confronting them, taking responsibility, and doing what needed to be done. Mona was proof of that. She had been broken, discarded, and abandoned. But instead of giving up, she had fought. For herself, for her puppies, for the chance at a better life. As Sarah carefully checked Mona's progress, Jake's heart swelled with gratitude. Mona wasn't just a survivor, she was a fighter. And for the first time in his life, Jake realized that sometimes healing wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about moving forward despite it. It had been a standard procedure. Michael and Mona were ready for another mission. The Austin Police Department had received a tip about a warehouse suspected of being a front for bomb-making operations. Mona, as always, was prepared to do her part, methodical, disciplined, and unwavering. Michael trusted her more than anything. She had saved his life countless times, and now she was about to do it again. But that morning, something was different. Rex, a younger, less experienced German Shepherd, had been assigned to accompany Michael's partner, Marcus Webb. Mona wasn't going to be part of the mission. The department had made the decision to rotate Rex in hoping to give him more field experience. Michael, despite his personal attachment to Mona, understood. Rex was still learning, but he was eager, strong, and ready. Mona had done her part. Now it was Rex's turn. As the team entered the warehouse, everything seemed normal. The familiar tension of a raid crept in, and everyone on high alert, moving in sync. Mona stayed behind, her body tense, waiting for her handler's orders, but she watched, she listened. She knew something wasn't right. Rex, young and overconfident, moved ahead too quickly, missing the subtle signs that Mona would have caught in an instant. She could have warned them, but she wasn't there. She wasn't allowed to be there. In the next moment, there was a deafening explosion. The blast was overwhelming, sending shockwaves through the building. The lights flickered out, and the sound of debris raining down filled the air. Michael was thrown back, his body slamming into the cold concrete floor. Pain shot through his head as he tried to stand, but the confusion, the chaos was too much. When the dust finally settled, Michael's world had changed forever. Tommy, his 6-year-old son, who had been at the scene with him for a Bring Your Kid to Work day, was caught in the explosion. Michael's heart shattered as he realized the unthinkable had happened. Tommy was gone. In an instant, he was gone. Rex had failed. And in that failure, Michael lost everything. Mona, now left outside the blast zone, had no idea what had happened. But when the team finally regrouped and Michael realized the loss, the rage, the guilt came flooding over him. Mona had been by his side for years, and yet it was Rex who had been assigned to this mission. Rex's mistake, his inexperience, had led to Tommy's death. Mona wasn't there to save him. She wasn't allowed to be. In the days that followed, Mona's place in Michael's life was no longer secure. His grief, his anger became all-consuming. He didn't have the strength to care for her anymore, not after what had happened. Mona, who had always been loyal, who had always been his protector, was now seen as another painful reminder of his failure. He pushed her away, neglected her until she finally disappeared, abandoned to the streets, pregnant, malnourished, and alone. And as Mona lay here now beneath Jake's touch, Jake realized that Mona wasn't just another stray. She wasn't just another victim of neglect. She was a part of something much bigger, a history of loss, pain, and sacrifice. Mona had carried the weight of Michael's trauma, and now she was carrying the weight of her own survival. Her story, like Jake's, wasn't finished. It had only just begun. The days following Mona's rescue were quiet yet charged with a delicate tension. Jake continued to care for her, nursing her back to health, but it wasn't just her physical wounds that needed attention. Mona's spirit was broken, and Jake could see it in her eyes. Her wariness, her hesitation, the way she shrank away from him when he reached out too quickly. For all her strength, her loyalty, and the fierce protection she had shown in her past life as a police dog, Mona had been shattered by the people she trusted the most. Jake, too, felt something stir within him when he looked at her. She wasn't just a dog to him anymore. She was a living being who had endured more than he could imagine, and in a way she reminded him of himself. He had carried his own burdens, hidden them deep inside for years, pretending they didn't matter. His fear of dogs, his anger at the world. He had bottled it up, kept it locked away until he had nowhere else to turn. And now, here he was facing the rawness of Mona's trauma, realizing that healing wasn't just about fixing broken bones or mending fur. It was about confronting the pain they both carried, about moving forward together, even when the past haunted them both. The bond between Jake and Mona began to form in the quiet moments. Mona had always been strong, always had a purpose. But now, with no job to perform, no handler to trust, she was lost. And Jake knew what it was like to feel lost. The weight of expectations, the pressure to be something he didn't think he could be, it all weighed on him too. But as he spent more time with her, he saw the flickers of trust returning in her eyes. Mona wasn't the same dog who had been discarded on the streets, vulnerable and broken. She was beginning to heal, and so was he. Jake found himself talking to her even when he didn't have words for his own pain. "You don't have to be scared anymore," he'd say, his voice low and steady. Mona would look up at him, her brown eyes meeting his as if trying to understand the sincerity in his words. The first time she licked his hand, Jake felt a shift, both within her and within himself. It was tentative at first, like she was testing the waters, unsure if she could trust him. But Jake held still, his hand open, and slowly Mona relaxed. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it was progress. Every time Mona let her guard down even just a little, Jake felt a new kind of hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, they were both healing. They were both finding their way. Sarah, who had been keeping a watchful eye on Mona's recovery, smiled as she saw the change in both of them. "She's getting stronger," she said one afternoon, watching Mona nudge her head against Jake's side. "And so are you." Jake wasn't sure how much of the credit he deserved. He was just doing what he could. But as he looked down at Mona curled up beside him, he realized that their relationship had become something deeper than he could have anticipated. They weren't just two lost souls wandering through life. They were becoming something more. They were becoming partners, healers of one another in ways neither had ever expected. In the evenings, Jake would sit outside with Mona, letting her soak in the quiet, the cool breeze, the world around her that was no longer filled with fear and pain. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Jake realized something. He wasn't just taking care of Mona. She was taking care of him too. They were beginning to understand each other in a way that words couldn't describe. It was more than just mutual trust. It was the unspoken bond that only those who had suffered and fought could understand. The past was still there, lurking in the shadows. But Jake and Mona were slowly finding their way out of it together. Mona had come a long way since Jake had first found her battered and near death. Her physical recovery was remarkable. Her fur, once matted and lifeless, now shone with health, and her body had gained the weight she needed to survive. Every day Jake marveled at the way she grew stronger, her muscles rippling under her coat as she slowly regained her energy. She no longer trembled from weakness or fear, but there was still something deep in her eyes, something that wasn't quite healed. Jake noticed it one morning as they took their usual walk around the yard. Mona, once so full of grace and confidence, now moved cautiously. Her steps were hesitant, as if she feared that the ground might suddenly give way beneath her. And when a loud noise from the neighbor's house startled her, she flinched and backed away, her body tense. The realization hit Jake like a wave. Mona was still haunted by her past, by the pain and abuse she had endured, by the way she had been betrayed by the very people she had trusted. She had recovered physically, yes, but emotionally she was still broken. And Jake knew that her healing wouldn't be complete until she could face those scars, the ones that weren't visible. He watched her for a while, standing at the edge of the yard, her body stiff with anxiety. Mona was still the loyal, brave dog she had always been, but the emotional toll of her past was a heavy burden, one she couldn't shake off just because her body had healed. Jake approached her slowly, his footsteps light on the grass. He could feel her tension rise as he drew closer, but he didn't stop. He had learned something over the past few weeks. Healing wasn't just about fixing the body, it was about understanding the soul too. Mona had taught him that, and now it was his turn to return the favor. He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't rush, he just sat quietly, letting the minutes stretch between them. He could see her eyes flicking nervously to the ground, then back to him as if unsure whether to trust him. The bond they had started to form wasn't just about saving her from her physical wounds. It was about earning her trust, showing her that she didn't have to be afraid anymore. Mona, Jake said softly, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment she stayed still, her eyes on him. Then slowly, cautiously, she inched closer until her head rested against his leg. The weight of her head on his lap felt like an enormous responsibility, but in that moment Jake didn't feel afraid. He felt a deep sense of connection, a silent understanding that they had both been through unimaginable pain, but that together they were stronger. He reached out slowly, carefully, and placed his hand on her back. She flinched at first, her body rigid, but then, after a few seconds, she relaxed her muscles, softening under his touch. Jake continued to stroke her fur, speaking to her in a quiet, steady voice. "I know you're still scared. I know it's hard, but I need you to trust me. I'm here to help you heal. We're in this together." Mona's body shifted slightly, leaning into his touch. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the first real sign that she was starting to trust him, to let go of the fear that had been holding her back. As the day passed, Jake spent more time with her, just sitting beside her, letting her know she wasn't alone. He took her on short walks, keeping the pace slow, allowing her to move at her own rhythm. And each time they encountered something that startled her, he reassured her, his voice gentle and constant, until the tension in her body eased. By the end of the day, Jake could see a change in Mona. It was subtle, but it was there. She wasn't completely healed, and there was still a long road ahead, but the first step had been taken. He realized then that Mona's healing would take time, just like his own. It wouldn't be immediate. There would be setbacks, but together they would face whatever came their way. The next few days passed quietly, but the transformation in Mona was palpable. Jake continued to be her steady presence, walking with her, sitting beside her, and watching her every move as she slowly adapted to her new life. Each small sign of progress was a victory, her body relaxing more, her steps growing steadier. But what truly touched Jake was the way Mona began to look at him. It was subtle, the shift in her eyes, the small movements she made to lean into him, to seek out his touch. It was trust. And Jake realized for the first time in his life that trust wasn't something to be afraid of. It was something to be earned. Mona, for all the strength she had shown in surviving her past, had been broken by it. Her world had once been filled with commands and discipline, but it had also been filled with pain and fear. Now with Jake, the world was changing. She was learning that not all humans were the same, that not all humans would hurt her. Jake had never imagined that he would be the one to help her heal. He had always feared dogs, especially German shepherds, since that incident from his childhood. But now he was seeing them through different eyes. His fear had been based on one bad experience, one mistake. Mona, on the other hand, had endured far more, and yet she still had the courage to trust. That realization made Jake feel something he hadn't felt in years: guilt, but also hope. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Jake found himself sitting on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. Mona sat beside him, her head resting gently against his leg. The sound of crickets chirping and the rustling of leaves filled the air. It was a peaceful moment, one that Jake had never thought he would experience, not after all the years of carrying his fear and anger. He looked down at Mona, who was staring out into the yard, her eyes soft and content for the first time since he'd met her. Her tail wagged faintly, and her body, once tense with fear, was now relaxed, as if she had finally found a safe place to rest. Jake reached down and stroked her fur, feeling the warmth of her body under his hand. "You've come a long way, girl," he whispered softly. Mona turned her head to look at him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that took his breath away. In that gaze, he saw something he hadn't expected: gratitude. Mona wasn't just accepting his help, she was appreciating it, trusting him in a way that went beyond words. It was then that Jake realized how much their bond had grown. In the beginning, Mona had been a scared, broken dog, and Jake had been a man haunted by his past, unwilling to face his fears. But now they had become something else. A team, a pair who understood each other's pain, who had both survived their own battles. Mona's past would never fully fade, but as Jake looked at her, he knew that together they had begun to build a new future. One step at a time, they were healing. The peaceful evening that had settled over Jake and Mona was suddenly interrupted. Jake had just finished his coffee when he heard the distinct sound of a car pulling into the driveway. It wasn't the usual hum of the neighborhood, and the car sounded heavier, more purposeful. He stood up, Mona immediately lifting her head from his lap, her ears alert. The sight of a familiar face brought Jake to a standstill. A man in his mid-40s wearing a police uniform stepped out of the car. He was tall, with sharp features that seemed weathered by years of hardship. Jake didn't need to ask. He knew exactly who it was: Michael Garrett. Jake's heart sank as the man walked toward the porch, his eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. Michael's footsteps faltered as he came closer, his gaze shifting from Jake to Mona, who was now standing protectively between them. Mona's stance wasn't aggressive, but Jake could feel the tension in her muscles, a reminder of the trauma she had endured. Michael stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Jake. I need to talk to you," Michael said, his voice hoarse as if the words had been hard to say. Jake didn't respond immediately, unsure of what to say or how to feel. Part of him wanted to push Michael away to keep Mona safe from the man who had caused her so much pain. But there was something in Michael's eyes, something broken, something remorseful, that stopped him from turning his back. "Please let me speak." Michael continued stepping forward slowly, his gaze fixed on Mona. "I've made mistakes I can't undo. He hesitated, his throat tightening. "I need to ask for her forgiveness. I need her back." Jake took a deep breath. The words he had feared hearing had come, and now he found himself caught in the middle. He had seen Mona's suffering, witnessed her slow recovery, and had come to love her not as just a dog, but as a companion who had been through hell and come out the other side. The thought of her going back to Michael, back to a place of neglect and abuse, was too much for him to bear. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive you," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "You had your chance with her, and you failed." Michael's face crumpled. "I know. I failed her in ways I can never fix. I was angry. After Tommy's death, His voice broke and he looked down at his hands, his fists clenched. "I took it out on her. I treated her like she was to blame, like she wasn't enough. And I hate myself for it. I'm sorry." Jake watched Michael carefully, taking in his words, the raw pain in his eyes. Michael wasn't making excuses. He wasn't trying to justify his actions. He was acknowledging them. But that didn't change what had happened. Jake knew how deep the scars ran for Mona and for Michael. Mona stood still, her eyes never leaving Michael's face. Her body was tense, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that looked like recognition. She had been a part of Michael's life for years, and despite the pain he had caused her, there was still a bond there. But Jake wasn't sure if that bond was enough to justify bringing her back to a man who had betrayed her so completely. "I can't promise you that she'll forgive you," Jake said softly, stepping closer to Mona, gently placing his hand on her back. "I won't let her go back to a life of fear. Not after everything she's been through." Michael's expression faltered, but he didn't argue. He just stood there, his face a mixture of shame and regret. "I understand," he said quietly. "I never expected forgiveness. He paused, taking a breath, his shoulders slumping. "I want her to have a better life. A life where she's loved and cared for. That's all I want for her now." Jake looked down at Mona, her eyes still locked on Michael as if trying to decide for herself what she wanted. And as he watched her, he realized that this wasn't just about Michael's redemption, it was about Mona's future. Jake stood there feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Mona's gaze never wavered from Michael's face, her body still tense but clearly torn between the past and the present. Jake had seen this kind of hesitation before, when people had to decide between what they had known and what they could have. But he also understood that this wasn't just about Mona's past. It was about the life she could have moving forward, a life of love, peace, and security. He glanced at Michael, who stood motionless, his eyes filled with deep regret. There was a rawness to his expression, a vulnerability that Jake had never expected to see. Michael had been a man of duty, of service, someone who had cared for Mona for years. And yet, in his grief and his pain, he had abandoned her. It was hard for Jake to reconcile the man before him with the person who had once trained Mona to serve and protect. But there was something in Michael's eyes that spoke of change, of redemption. He wasn't the same man who had failed Mona. Jake felt his heart tug in two directions. He understood the bond between Michael and Mona. It was undeniable. But he also knew that Mona had fought too hard to get where she was now. She had come so far. Could he really send her back to someone who had once treated her like a tool? A part of him said no. A part of him said that Mona deserved better, that she deserved a life free of fear, free of pain. Mona's been through more than she should have. Jake said, his voice firm but kind, "And I've seen what she's capable of. I've seen the way she's starting to trust again. I'm not going to take that from her." Sarah, who had been silently observing the scene, stepped forward, her voice soft but full of conviction. "Jake's right," she said, placing a hand gently on his arm. "Mona has been through enough. She deserves a future where she's not bound by her past. She deserves a family that will love her unconditionally, without fear, without pain." Jake turned to look at Sarah, and in that moment he saw the truth in her eyes. Sarah had seen Mona's suffering, and she had witnessed her recovery. She knew the journey they were on, but she also knew that Mona needed more than just physical healing. She needed emotional healing. Jake took a deep breath, his decision settling in his chest. He couldn't send Mona back. He couldn't let her go back to a life of fear, to a life where her loyalty was taken for granted, where her love was exploited. Mona had found him for a reason. She had fought through all the pain and hardship to survive, and now she deserved the chance to live without the ghosts of her past haunting her. "You're right," Jake said, his voice steady. "She deserves better. She deserves a life where she's loved, where she's cared for, where she's safe. And that's what I'm going to give her." He turned back to Michael, who was still standing there, his face a mixture of sadness and understanding. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes brimming with tears. "I get it," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve her. I never should have treated her the way I did. But if you'll take her, if you'll give her a life she deserves, then I'll sign whatever papers you need. She's yours." Jake looked at Mona, who was now looking up at him, her eyes soft and trusting. She had made her choice too. She had chosen to trust him to stay with him, and now it was his turn to prove that he would never let her down. "I'll take care of her," Jake said, his voice filled with a promise. "I'll give her the life she's always deserved." As Michael signed the papers, Jake felt a sense of finality wash over him. The decision had been made. Mona would stay with him, and together they would build a new life, one where fear didn't dictate their every move. The sound of the pen scratching across the paper echoed in the stillness, and with it, the finality of the decision. Michael Garrett, a man who had once been a hero in the eyes of his community, now stood broken. His past mistakes laid bare before him. He had given Mona the life she had once known, but in his grief and his pain, he had taken that very life from her. The dog who had once been his loyal partner, a protector on the job, had become a symbol of his failures, his inability to cope with the loss of his son. Michael signed the papers, and his eyes met Jake's, a look of quiet sorrow in them. "She deserves better than I could give her," Michael said, his voice thick with regret. "I can't undo what I did, but I can give her this chance." Jake didn't know what to say. The weight of the moment pressed on him. He had seen Michael's grief, had heard the pain in his voice, but Mona's life couldn't be given up again, not to anyone, not to the man who had abandoned her once. "I'll take care of her," Jake said, the words coming easily now with a deep conviction he hadn't realized he had before. "I'll make sure she has the life she deserves." As Michael left, Jake felt the heaviness of the moment lift, but only slightly. It was clear that Mona's journey wasn't just one of physical recovery. It was a journey of healing from everything she had endured. Abandonment, neglect, and betrayal. And though the past was hard to face, Jake knew Mona would be better off with him, surrounded by the peace and love he could offer. As he looked down at her, Mona had her head resting against his knee, her body relaxed. She seemed to know. She seemed to understand that her life was about to change. For the better. Jake smiled at her, gently running his fingers through her fur. "You're safe now, Mona. No one's going to hurt you again." It was a quiet promise, but it was a promise Jake intended to keep. Jake had made the decision. It was time for Mona to come home. He couldn't leave her behind after everything she had been through. No longer just a rescue mission, this was a commitment, a new chapter for both of them. He had promised Mona a life without fear, a life where she could trust again, and it would begin in the place that was now home. The house, though modest, was filled with warmth. Jake and Rebecca had spent years building their life together, and now they were preparing for the arrival of their first child. It had been a quiet anticipation, but now, with Mona joining their family, everything felt like it was coming full circle. The morning Mona arrived was a gentle one. Jake had set up a comfortable bed in the living room, away from the chaos of the construction that still surrounded the yard. He opened the door for her, his hand on her back as she hesitated at the threshold. She looked around, sniffing the air, her eyes wide with uncertainty, but also with a hint of curiosity. "Welcome home, girl," Jake murmured, kneeling down to her level. Mona stepped inside, cautiously looking back at him once, then slowly walking in. She moved past the couch, the kitchen, and finally settled on the bed Jake had prepared for her. She lay down, her body relaxed but alert, as though she was still trying to figure out what it all meant. Rebecca, who had been in the kitchen, walked into the living room and froze when she saw Mona for the first time. Her face softened immediately, her eyes widening as she looked at the dog. Jake saw the moment she connected with Mona. It wasn't just the kindness in Rebecca's eyes, it was something deeper, something instinctual. She could see the same thing Jake saw in Mona, a survivor, a soul who had endured so much but still had so much love to give. "She's beautiful," Rebecca whispered, crouching down slowly, offering her hand to Mona. Mona hesitated, sniffing her cautiously, but she didn't flinch away. Instead, she gently licked Rebecca's palm, a gesture of cautious acceptance. Jake's heart swelled with emotion. The bond between Rebecca and Mona was immediate, and in that moment he realized that they were all part of something bigger. They were building a family together, one that was stronger because of everything they had been through. Over the next few weeks, Mona's place in their home began to solidify. She wasn't just a dog. She was part of their family. Mona followed Rebecca around the house, sometimes lying at her feet while she worked, sometimes sitting quietly by the window as if keeping watch. She had her space, but she was always there quietly offering comfort, as if sensing the changes happening in their lives. Rebecca spoke to Mona as she would to a friend, asking her how her day had been or sharing little bits of excitement about the baby. Mona would listen, her ears perking up whenever Rebecca's voice held that soft maternal tone. Jake watched them, his heart at ease. Mona was beginning to let go of the fear that had once controlled her. She was becoming part of something new, a life filled with love and care. When Rebecca's pregnancy started to show, Mona seemed to become even more protective, following her closely whenever she moved around the house. Jake noticed how the dog's instincts had kicked in. She would stay by Rebecca's side, sitting close when Rebecca rested or moved about. Mona was adjusting to her new role, and it was clear that she had begun to see Rebecca as someone to protect, someone to care for. In the evenings when Jake and Rebecca sat on the porch, Mona would join them, her head resting against Jake's leg as they talked about their hopes for the future. Mona seemed to know that this was a new beginning. She had found her place with them, and they had found their place with her. As the days went by, Jake saw Mona becoming more and more comfortable. Her past no longer had the same hold on her. She was no longer the scared, abandoned dog. She was Mona, part of their family and a protector in her own right. The healing process had begun not just for Mona, but for them all. The air in Jake and Rebecca's home was filled with anticipation. Each day brought them one step closer to the arrival of their first child. Rebecca's pregnancy had reached its final stretch, and while she moved a little slower, her excitement was contagious. The nursery was ready, the crib set up, and the baby clothes neatly folded in drawers. But through all the preparations, there was one constant presence: Mona. Mona had become an integral part of the household, her protective instincts sharp as ever. Jake could see it in the way she watched over Rebecca, never far from her side. Whether Rebecca was in the kitchen, resting on the couch, or walking around the yard, Mona was always close by. Her eyes followed Rebecca's every move, and if Rebecca paused for even a moment, Mona would sit quietly waiting, as if guarding her from an invisible threat. Jake smiled at the sight. He had never imagined that a dog, especially one he had feared for so long, could become such a comforting and loyal presence in their home. But Mona had transformed in ways Jake hadn't expected. The once fearful, broken dog was now a protector, not just of him, but of Rebecca and their future child. Mona was ready for this new role, and Jake was beginning to see it clearly. Even in the evenings, as the family sat on the porch after dinner, Mona would join them. She'd lie beside Jake, her head resting against his leg, her eyes occasionally flicking to Rebecca, making sure she was safe. It was as if Mona understood that this moment, this peaceful time together, was all part of the new life they were building. Rebecca would speak softly to Mona, telling her about the baby's progress, about the excitement of becoming a mother, and Mona would listen, her ears perked, her body relaxed in the warmth of the evening. Jake felt a sense of contentment he had never known before. It wasn't just the baby or the life he was creating with Rebecca, it was Mona too. She had become part of this family, this home, and the love she gave them was a reminder of how far they had come. Mona's healing had brought them closer, not just to her, but to each other. Rebecca had always been the more nurturing of the two, but Jake saw how Mona was beginning to mirror that same tenderness. The protective side of Mona was becoming more pronounced, especially when Rebecca's belly grew larger. Mona would nudge her gently, as if reminding the baby that she was already watching over them. Sometimes when Rebecca sat on the couch resting, Mona would curl up at her feet, her body still but alert. It wasn't just the presence of the baby that had changed things, it was the sense of purpose that Mona had found in their family. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. She was part of something bigger than herself. And so in these last weeks before the baby's arrival, Jake realized how important Mona had become in all of their lives. She had healed, yes, but she had also grown into something even more vital: a protector, a companion, and a friend. Every moment felt like a small victory. Each day that Mona settled further into the rhythms of their home, each time Rebecca spoke to her with tenderness, and each time Jake felt Mona's trust in him growing stronger. Jake reached out, giving Mona a soft pat on the head. "You're going to be a great big sister," he said with a smile. Rebecca, hearing him, chuckled. "I think she already knows." As the days passed, the anticipation for their child's arrival grew. They knew that challenges lay ahead, new responsibilities, sleepless nights, and adjustments. But Jake felt ready for everything that was coming because with Mona by their side, they were already a family. The weeks that followed were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Jake and Rebecca were both adjusting to the anticipation of their baby's arrival, and Mona, now known as Bella, was learning to adapt to her new role in the family. There were days when things felt effortless, like when they sat together on the porch in the evenings enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. Other days were more challenging with small adjustments that were sometimes difficult for everyone involved. But through it all, Bella was there, patient, understanding, and unwavering. Jake couldn't help but marvel at how quickly she had become a true member of the family. It wasn't just about her physical healing, it was about her spirit. When she had first come into their lives, Bella had been a broken animal haunted by her past. But now she was growing stronger, more at ease with her place in their home. She was no longer the dog who had been abandoned and forgotten. She was Mona, or rather Bella, a beloved companion and protector. But the transition wasn't always easy. There were moments when Bella's past would resurface. A loud noise, an unexpected movement, or even a brief change in routine would startle her, sending her into a brief moment of panic. Jake noticed it mostly when Rebecca moved around the house, preparing for the baby. Bella would become anxious, unsure of the new changes, and Jake would have to step in and calm her down. Rebecca, too, was learning how to navigate their growing family. While she adored Bella, there were moments when she was unsure how to balance the needs of the dog with her own. It wasn't that she didn't understand, but with her pregnancy nearing its end, everything felt like a whirlwind. Despite the tension at times, she never once considered giving up on Bella. She had seen the bond between Jake and the dog, and that made all the difference. "Hey, Bella," Rebecca would say softly as she placed a hand on the dog's head. "You're doing great. Just hang in there a little longer." Jake couldn't help but smile at the scene. The words weren't meant just for Bella. They were for Rebecca, too. As much as they were adjusting to their roles, it was all part of the journey. It was about learning to balance the needs of each other, finding peace and harmony, even when it felt like everything was shifting. As the days passed, Bella became more comfortable with the changes. She started to understand Rebecca's movements, anticipating them with a calmness that hadn't been there before. She no longer flinched at every sound or movement. Instead, she stood watch over the house, her gaze alert yet gentle. It was as if she had finally found peace in her own heart, knowing that she was safe, knowing that she had a place here with Jake and Rebecca. The transition wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Bella was no longer an outsider. She had become the heart of their home, a steadfast presence in their family. There was still work to be done, but Jake couldn't help but feel grateful. Bella had become a protector in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it wasn't just about keeping them safe from danger. It was about helping them find a sense of security in each other, learning to trust and love again. And as the days continued to pass, Bella's role became even more evident. She wasn't just the dog in the house. She was a partner, a companion, and a protector. She had embraced her new life, and so had they. It had been months since Mona, now known as Bella, came into Jake and Rebecca's lives, and the changes were profound. The past had left its mark on both Mona and Jake, but they had found a way to heal. Bella was no longer the broken dog who had been abandoned on the streets. She was a beloved member of their family. She had become a companion, a protector, and a constant presence that made their house feel like a home. The healing wasn't just physical. It wasn't just about Mona's scars or the malnutrition she had suffered. It was about the fear that had once consumed her, the trauma that had shaped her actions, her reactions, and her view of the world. Jake had seen that fear in her every day, the way she would tense up at sudden movements or loud sounds, the way she would retreat to a corner when she felt cornered. But over time, with love, patience, and understanding, Bella, had begun to change. But Jake knew that their healing process was far from over. Bella had come so far, but the emotional scars from her past were not easy to erase. And just as Mona had fought to trust again, Jake had fought to overcome the fears that had haunted him for years. His childhood trauma, the deep-rooted fear of dogs that had controlled so much of his life, had been a barrier between him and the companionship he craved. Now, as he looked at Bella lying peacefully at his feet, Jake realized that the journey they had been on wasn't just about saving a dog, it was about saving himself too. He had faced his fear. He had faced the ghosts of his past and found the strength to move beyond them. And in doing so, he had found something he never thought possible: unconditional love, both for Mona and for himself. The bond between them had grown in ways Jake hadn't anticipated. There was no longer any hesitation in the way Mona responded to him. Her trust was unwavering, and she had learned to look to him for comfort and guidance. And Jake, in turn, had learned to look to her for something that had been missing from his life for so long: companionship and loyalty. It was a bond forged through shared pain and triumph, through the slow and steady process of healing. And with it came the realization that forgiveness was not just about letting go of the past, it was about embracing the future with open arms. As Jake sat beside Bella one evening watching the sunset with Rebecca, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey they had been on, for the love that had blossomed from the cracks of their broken pasts. Mona, once a dog consumed by fear and abandonment, was now part of something greater. She was part of their family, and her love had transformed them all. Jake looked at Rebecca, her hand resting on her growing belly, and he smiled. The past had shaped them, but it would not define them. They were a family stronger and more complete than ever before. The warmth of the late afternoon sun bathed the backyard in a soft golden light. Jake sat on the porch swing, his arm resting comfortably around Rebecca's shoulders, her hand gently resting on her swollen belly. In front of them, Mona, now fully settled into her role as a beloved family member, lay in the grass, her body stretched out, tail swishing lazily as she watched the world go by. The once tense, fearful dog had transformed into a peaceful, trusting companion. The small family of 3, soon to be 4, was at peace. The air was thick with the sounds of nature, the chirping of birds, and the distant hum of traffic. But in this moment, in this corner of the world, it felt as though time had slowed. For the first time in years, Jake felt truly content. Mona had become more than just a protector. She had become a symbol of everything they had fought for, of healing, of love, and of the strength that could come from even the darkest of beginnings. She was no longer the broken animal she had been when Jake had first found her, no longer the neglected dog whose past haunted her every step. She had found her place here beside them in their home, where she was safe, loved, and needed. Rebecca, who had once been uncertain about the presence of a large dog in their home, now shared a deep bond with Mona. She no longer saw her as a reminder of Jake's past fear, but as a friend and a companion who brought warmth to their lives. Mona had been there during her pregnancy, her constant presence a comfort, as if the dog understood the significance of the baby growing inside her. And when their child finally arrived, Mona was there too, protective and gentle, as if her role as a guardian had come full circle. As Jake looked down at his wife, a sense of gratitude filled him. His life had changed in ways he never expected. He was no longer the man who avoided dogs, the man who lived in fear. He was now a father, a husband, and a protector in his own right. Mona, who had once been a stranger to him, had helped him overcome the very fears that had controlled his life for so long. She had shown him what it meant to trust again, to love without hesitation. And in return, he had given her a second chance, a home, a family. The baby's first cry echoed through the house that day, and Jake felt a rush of emotions flood over him. He had never imagined that the journey he had started with Mona would lead him to this moment. He had faced his deepest fears, and in doing so had become the man he always wanted to be, someone capable of love, of compassion, and of loyalty. He looked over at Mona, her golden fur glowing in the sunlight, her eyes filled with trust and contentment. She had become more than just a pet. She had become family, an integral part of their home. The love she had brought into their lives was immeasurable. As the evening settled in, Jake, Rebecca, and Mona sat together on the porch, watching the sky change colors as the sun dipped below the horizon. This was the future they had built together, a future full of hope, love, and second chances. Jake wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't afraid of what the future held or of the challenges they would face. He had Mona. He had Rebecca, and soon they would have their child. Together they would face everything that came their way, and nothing could take away the peace they had found. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Jake leaned back, feeling the warmth of the people and the dog he loved around him. This was home. This was the life they had made. And he was finally ready to live it fully. The story of Jake Mona and their journey together is a powerful reminder of the incredible bond that can exist between humans and animals, especially dogs. Through Mona's transformation from a fearful, broken creature to a loyal and loving protector, we see how love, patience, and trust can heal even the deepest scars. The German Shepherd. A breed known for its intelligence, loyalty, and bravery plays a central role in this tale. Mona, though initially abandoned and neglected, shows us the remarkable resilience of this noble breed. In a world where animals often face abuse, neglect, or abandonment, stories like Mona's remind us of the importance of compassion, responsibility, and second chances. Animals, especially dogs, give us so much: unconditional love, loyalty, and companionship without asking for anything in return. They are not just pets, but friends, family, and protectors who deserve our respect and care. By choosing to love and care for them, we not only enrich their lives, but also ours. Mona's story is more than just a tale of survival. It's a story of healing, redemption, and the power of love. It teaches us that no matter the pain we carry, we can overcome it with trust, compassion, and a willingness to face our fears. The bond between humans and animals is one of the purest forms of love, and when we open our hearts to them, we experience a profound connection that enriches our lives. Let us all take inspiration from Mona's journey. Whether it's adopting a rescue dog, providing care for animals in need, or simply showing kindness to the creatures we share our world with, we can make a difference. Let's continue to spread love, care, and respect for all animals, for in doing so we nurture the best parts of ourselves.